as an organization that stands for inclusion, it is my responsibility, and it is shesaid.so's responsibility to think intersectionally about the mission and how we approach it. What that meant for me is making sure that I am in the middle of those conversations amidst those groups of people that I don't directly represent, but need to take into account as a crucial part of what we do. For example, this year, given the political context of what's happening in the US, for example, in regards to gender, our trans community is at risk right now. Their safety is at risk, let alone their, likelihood of developing a successful career in music. As a result of that, we were making bigger efforts to support the trans community within the shesaid.so space within the music industry.
Mixcloud.
The Inside Track.
Welcome everybody to another episode of The Inside Track with myself, Nico Perez. And I'm very happy to be joined today by our guest, Andreea Magdalina, coming to us live from Los Angeles, California. Andreea is the founder of shesaid.so, co-founder of the IAMJT management agency and boutique studio. And she's done a lot of interesting work with clients like Coachella and ADE out of Amsterdam. So great to have you on the podcast, Andreea.
Very happy to be here. Thank you for having me, Nico.
Yeah, no worries. We've actually known each other for over a decade because you were Mixcloud's very first ever community manager. I think it was around 2011 or 2012 that you joined us.
Yeah, it was 2012 to be precise. We go way back, and Mixcloud will forever have a special place in my heart because of that. I wasn't just Mixcloud's first community manager, but Mixcloud was my first ever legit music job as well. So I'll forever be grateful to you guys.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for the kind words. I'm not sure how legit we were at the time. I think we were like a ragtag bunch of, half a dozen to a dozen people, but it's really nice to hear that. And maybe I'd love to start out with kind of the origin story of shesaid.so, because that started a little bit after kind of you moved on from Mixcloud around 2014 or so. And I'm sure you've probably told this story many times, but maybe there's some people who through this podcast are coming across you and shesaid.so for the first time. So would you be able to share kind of how it got started?
For sure. The catalyst behind shesaid.so was actually a moment that happened during my Mixcloud job. I was still living in London at the time, and myself and Nico, one of the other Mixcloud co-founders, were having a meeting with, I think I can say now, it's been long enough, but we were having a meeting with the BBC to explore a very interesting, potentially lucrative opportunity, partnership opportunity between the two. And I just remember entering that room. Nikhil is not your traditional CEO type either, or maybe from a tech perspective he is, right? Because he's not a suit and tie kind of guy, and he's also brown. So here we come in. I'm like this 22-year-old Eastern European Romanian girl with a strong accent, obviously very young as well. And we enter this room surrounded by like 5 or 6 older white men in suits, And all of a sudden, the dynamic of that whole meeting was already pretty interesting. But it wasn't until one of them asked me to make coffee for everybody, or tea or something along those lines, And then Nikhil, I remember stepping in and being like, "Oh no, she's here. She's like my colleague. She's not my assistant," or something like that. So that was such a powerful moment in my head, in my memory. I had the idea of shesaid.so beforehand. I was the only woman in the Mixcloud team, for example. But having said that, I always felt very looked after and welcome and included in all conversations. In fact, it was one of the things that I loved the most about working with with you guys and in general with a smaller company, a startup, as opposed to a corporate. The fact that I had so much access and so much responsibility and learning so much from the job. But at the same time, I was also living my own experience as a young woman just entering the business. And I think on top of that, being from Romania played a part at that time. The socio-political context of being Eastern European in London was a little bit different than it is now. But at the same time, that kind of discrimination continues to happen in many other ways to many other types of people. So I was already, all of these things were happening around me. I was observing them. I thought, okay, maybe it's not just me, you know. At the same time, I was still very deeply involved in the startup scene in London, which was just booming at the time. I think it was a golden era for startups in Shoreditch and All Street in that area. So I was observing and taking things from the technology space and trying all the good things, at least, and trying to put them, in place in music, apply them in music somehow. And one of those things was being a part of a community of women in tech called Ada's List, which inspired me to do a similar thing for music. And it was that catalyst meeting that really, was the last drop for me that motivated me to go home, put together this Google group that evening, call it She Said So, because the URL was very cheap. She said that so. And that's what gave the name for the whole thing. But I really didn't expect it to blow up in the way that it did. It was just a passion project that in the end turned into something more. And I'm very grateful every day for the opportunity to continue working on it and continue pushing the mission behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously, I think you tapped into something in this sort of latent feeling that clearly by the scale and the size of what you've built as a community and global collective, I think you have over 12,000 members now or so, something like
Yeah,
that.
I mean that number is, to be honest, our data is all over the place. I think overall we have at least 30,000 people in the global community. But right now we're fragmented between, I guess, the global core She Said So community. And then we have chapters around the world that are more localized. And, everything happens in their local language.
Yeah, and I'd love to dive into the topic of kind of building a community and a global community with different chapters. But I'm curious, before we get to that, just when you look back over the last 10 or 11 years or so, how do you feel like the music industry has evolved with regards to gender? Obviously, we've been through things like the Me Too movement. You live in LA or based in LA. Obviously, that affected a lot of different people across Hollywood and entertainment industries. We've been through Black Lives Matter in 2020, many different things that have happened throughout the world. And I'm just curious, like, where do you think we are today, and what areas do you think we still need to work on?
It's been very interesting, I have to admit, being in the middle of this movement over the last 10 years, especially coming into it from a gender perspective, from the She Said So perspective. I think at that time in 2014, which She Said So, I really tapped into something latent, something that was bubbling up already. The timing was perfect for She Said So type of initiative to exist, at least in Europe. I think there were maybe a couple of initiatives already in the States, but in Europe there was really nothing like it. Even the concept of bringing people together as a community was relatively new at the time. And again, pretty much a startup thing. I got inspired by what we were trying to do at Mixcloud and apply some of those principles to the She Said So community. And the conversation has definitely changed over the last, 10, 15 years since I started engaging with it. She Said So started off at a time when that awareness was just bubbling up, but it definitely didn't touch the music industry at all. So we launched before the Me Too movement happened. Then that kind of helped add to the conversation as well. And for us, the first goal was to just bring women together in this shared safe space that we call the shesaid.so community to support each other, exchange ideas, exchange opportunities. And then the second goal was to create awareness about the fact that there is, a gender gap. There is discrimination going on. There is misogyny in our society, in our business, and it is impacting the bottom line. It is impacting the numbers. And it's not just ethically unacceptable, I think over the last 10 years that awareness piece has definitely settled in. I think the concept of diversity and inclusion is now something that's deeply rooted in the social discourse and in the music business rooms. And now we're in a different stage where, well, if we are to look at American politics, it may feel like DEI is taking a step back, but I refuse to accept that reality that they're pushing on us. And on the other hand, there has been so much progress. There is a lot more visibility. There is a lot more representation. You especially see that on stage in terms of artists. There is a wider range of diverse talent that we can tap into. I think initiatives like shesaid.so have helped create those opportunities, open those doors, and we have to give thanks to technology for that as well, because it's made it a lot more accessible for anyone to, get into music, whether it's as a music producer or executive or whatever that may be. The tools are there to help us access the industry more easily, but at the same time, it is still the music business. You're still going to hit a lot of these invisible walls. And those are determined, I guess, to some extent by the wider social construct that we operate in. So to sum up, I guess we went from like this awareness phase, let's just get people to care about it, to now coming up with more solid ways of making that the new normal. I mean, the ultimate goal is for initiatives like shesaid.so to not exist anymore. That's the ultimate goal, because things are so equitable and fair and transparent and good for everybody that we don't even need to talk about it, right? So now we're not really talking about it as much as we're doing things to really keep those doors open more of them, and really focus on areas that are struggling more than others. For example, behind the scenes, there isn't as much representation at the top levels still. I think there was a recent study done by, I believe, TuneCore with USC Annenberg Institute, where they showed that I think junior roles, for example, have pretty balanced representation when it comes to gender. But as you go up, it gets, the numbers get a lot bleaker. And that also happens in technical roles. So leadership and technical roles like music production, engineering, stage management, that kind of stuff. Those are areas where we still need a lot more work to be done.
Do you have any thoughts on sort of with those technical roles or some of the more senior roles and things like that, what efforts both kind of platforms, organizations, people can take to try and make it more equitable? Any thoughts on kind of what you've seen work well?
For us, what's worked really well in terms of breaking those glass ceilings were mentorship programs. That's a very, specific tactic that enables us to touch on different points, and that includes education. So through mentorship, mentees get access to a knowledge base. A lot of what happens in the music industry is learned through experience, really, through having conversations and calls and meetings and being in studios with artists and being on email threads where you see those deals being discussed and how they're being discussed, so that access to that knowledge is crucial.
I was going to say so much of it is relationship based as well, right? So if you have a good
Exactly.
mentor or a good coach, you can build those relationships. That's such a big part of it.
Yeah, the music business, any kind of business, 50% of the work you do is relationships. It's how you relate to the other person, is making it pleasant, especially when you work in a high pressure environment, making it a pleasant experience in spite of the stress, right? That you're and the impossible deadlines and all that kind of stuff. Going back to the mentorship programs, they not only give you access to knowledge, they give you access to people, which is so important. And we've seen a lot of nepotism and continue to see, especially in the creative industries, right? Where beyond gender, here we're getting into economics. There's, I think I saw another stat recently, maybe it was UK only, but I think only about 25% of the creative industries is like made up of people from a working class background. Someone on the inside is very important. Having a mentor, opening those doors.
So yeah, I saw on your website that you guys offer mentoring, but also you've recently, I think, partnered with Valentine's and are doing grants ranging from about 5,000 to up to 30,000 pounds. Is that for creative music projects, or can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I'm so lucky to be able to work with Valentine's on their True Music Fund campaign this year. It's exactly the kind of ideal project that we like to launch at She Said So, because it's putting our money where our mouths are, right? So this opportunity, is a grant that people are able to apply for. It's open internationally. And I guess the focus for the grant was unlocking a music idea that you normally wouldn't have the resources for. So that can be anything from making music, buying equipment, launching an online radio station, launching an event series. It could literally be anything. So we're actually in the process of selecting the final grant recipients. And from there, we will start on a mentorship journey. So see mentorship coming in again here, kind of in addition to giving them the money, we'll also put the She Said So network to their use and pairing them with mentors to help them deliver those projects that they applied for.
Awesome. If anybody's thinking of starting an online music radio station, let me know. I'm happy to help. I've got some tips and advice. And is that something that's going to happen every year, or is this the first year? See how it goes.
This is the first year we're doing it with Valentine's. I think they've been running this initiative in the past, but it's been going so well that I have the feeling this is not the last of our collaborations with Valentine.
Sweet. Awesome. Yeah, I'd love to get into to talk a little bit about community building. You mentioned kind of that was something that you worked on at Mixcloud in the early days. You took inspiration from some of the things happening in the tech industry. But I'm just curious, you've built up this incredible community or collective of people around the world. And you also have these chapters at a dozen or so cities around the world. How did you kind of land on that model of kind of having a core team and the chapters? And I guess a subsequent question to that is, what have you learned in that? Like, what's worked well and what has been actually more challenging or difficult?
Well, She Said So being a global community has definitely been our blessing and our curse at the same time. Because obviously music is universal, but at the same time, the way we make it and we consume it can vary. Not just because of our geography, but our identity shapes that behavior as well, right? So when it came to building She Said So, initially it started off with a heavy focus on the UK because I was still living in London, and so it was a very organic kind of growth through word of mouth. I just invited my first 10 people, and then the next day we were 20, and then 5 days after that we were 50. So it was very organic and continues to be. We don't have ads in place or anything like that to attract new members. It very much continues to be an organic type of community. And as we continue growing, we realize that those differences between us start shaping up the conversations that we were having, and especially started impacting the way we thought about solutions. So, for example, the way maternity leave, for example, is covered in the UK from a legal perspective is very different from what that looks like in Sweden, which is very different from what that looks like in the US, and so on. So that's when we realized geographically partitioning the community would be helpful in framing these conversations and solutions better. And in other countries, it also made a lot more sense for people to just connect with each other on in their local language. For example, France, it being such a massive music market that's very globally connected to what's happening in the wider music industry or music world, it still very much has such an internal kind of perspective, and a lot of it is shaped by the language itself, right? So it wasn't really a strategic decision as much as it was a reactive decision to how the community was growing and the kind of conversations that were happening in there, and what people were asking for and needed, right? So everything that we've done since She Said So was born is just us really, and me especially, paying attention as closely as possible to what's being discussed in the community, and then coming up with solutions or tools that foster that even further.
And does the discussion happen mostly in real life at kind of meetups and events and gatherings, or does it happen online through your newsletter or email list or things like that? Or where does kind of the core of the discussion take place?
I would say online still, in that original Google group and a couple of other community channels that we launched since then. But I do have to say that the magic sauce for us was also in the IRL events that we were doing at the beginning of She Said So. The magic that was felt in those rooms, and we still get that feedback at some of our in-person events. That the vibe in the space is just different. People are nicer. There's obviously more different types of faces in a room when we host an event. Typically, tends to be more female energy, obviously, and I do think that plays a key role in building a community, even if it was meant to be an online community from the get-go. And we used to do a lot more in-person things before the pandemic hit us, and that's kind of what forced us to move even more deeply into the online space and rethink some of our offline events into online interactions, because it just served our global community better, and it removed mobility as an obstacle from being a part of whatever it is that we're doing.
And it is most of the people who kind of participate and take part, is there some volunteers and some people who are kind of full-time like yourself, paid members of the team? And is the model essentially like a membership model? Is that how it works?
There is a membership model, yeah. We introduced that during the pandemic, actually. Up until the pandemic, She Said So was like a fully volunteer-run type of organization. And then we realized, as we were getting bigger, and then especially as the pandemic hit, that we need to start introducing some sort of, I guess, a business model that both fits with the ethos and the brand values, which means keeping things accessible for everyone, or as accessible as possible, but enabled us to survive at the same time. So we introduced paid membership fees as a solution to that. And I guess for us, brand partnerships also play a key role in keeping the She Said So organization alive. So it's not the best business model out there, I gotta say. Don't rely on brand sponsorships, but sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do.
I definitely know about brand partnerships. It's kind of a bit of a roller coaster, up and down. It was interesting because I actually recorded another episode in the series recently with Nix and Joshua from the Black Artist Database. And we talked a lot about kind of their history and their origin story and things like that. And one of their challenges at the moment is funding, right? Because a lot of the grants that existed during the pandemic and were there and help support organizations like theirs, like not-for-profit organizations, a lot of them have sadly dried up and budgets have been cut back and things like that. And so I do think that any community or collective does need to find some way of being sustainable at the end of the day. You can't expect everybody to volunteer and work for free forever. That's just not realistic. And so I think that, trying to find some form of sustainable income to, make the whole initiative sustainable is really kind of foundational at the core layer.
Yeah. And for us, it was a lesson that we learned the hard way. At the beginning, shesaid.so was a much more collaborative kind of effort between me and different people. I would say we were between 10 and 20 people in the core team at the beginning. And by core team, I mean the global community plus these kind of localized chapters. And as time went by, people kept coming and going. I was kind of the only one that's constant. There's still people who are here, who have been here from the beginning, but they are not actively involved in running the organization, the community, right? They're just playing whatever role they can as a community member and early sort of advisor or ambassador. So for us, the solution, or for me, the solution was really taking this upon myself to be like, okay, if I want to keep this thing alive, I need to figure out how I'm going to do this. I need to say yes to some things and a lot of no's to a lot of other things, because we were the yes people at the beginning, like with everybody, right? You're just like saying yes to everything at the beginning. And then you start realizing that 80% of your impact comes from 20% of your efforts. So just focus more on those 20% kind of efforts and ignore everything else. And when you have a big team of people with lots of ideas, it's really hard to stay focused. So what that meant for me is intentionally building a very small team around me. Essentially, shesaid.so right now, from a staff perspective, is me plus one full-time marketing person plus one part-time operations person. That's it. And then we work with contractors like a designer or I don't know, someone we need more specialized support for, either on a limited time basis or on a project basis, for example, and just be super lean as a team, so that when things do get rough, because they do get rough, and luckily we don't depend on governmental funding, which I guess is a good thing and a bad thing at the same time. So when the funding does get thin, we're able to move in a lean way through the bad times as well, because there's not as many of us to hold it all together.
Survive and keep it sustainable, basically.
Yeah, pretty much.
Speaking of actually Nix and the Black Artist Database, I was actually in researching the conversation and podcast that I recorded with her, I actually stumbled across a YouTube video where Giorgia Taglietti was interviewing her at IMS. And I noticed on your website, you talk a lot about intersectionality being very important. And I'm just curious, obviously, like I mentioned, we've been through 2020, Black Lives Matter, many different things around the world. And when you think about kind of your efforts today and you think about intersectionality, how do you think that's kind of informing where you put your energy and kind of what that 20% of things that you focus on, how it kind of gives you perspective on that.
Yeah, for sure. As an organization that stands for inclusion, and myself being a white woman, in the middle of this conversation, it is my responsibility, and it is She Said So's responsibility to think intersectionally about the mission and how we approach it. And so what that meant for me is making sure that I am in the middle of those conversations amidst those groups of people that I don't directly represent, but need to take into account as a crucial part of what we do. So what that means for us, for example, this year, given the political context of what's happening in the US, for example, in regards to gender, our trans community is at risk right now. Their safety is at risk, let alone their, likelihood of developing a successful career in music. I mean, as a result of that, we need to take that into account. We were making bigger efforts to support the trans community within the She Said So space within the music industry. So we're always responding to what's happening outside in the world. And intersectionality, I like to think, has been, a foundational aspect of what we've built at She Said So. And I hope that it's still being felt and seen and heard through everything that we do. We don't necessarily put that stamp on it. Oh, look, we just launched an intersectional program, or editorial feature. No, but when we do publish an editorial feature, we like to make sure that as many identities as possible are being represented in there without us naming it so.
And I guess things like that project you're working on with Ballantynes in terms of the grant funding, that helps from a socio-economic level in terms of people maybe kind of just starting out in music. Like you said, there's only 25% of people with a working class background. How do you get those first steps? How do you get to get to play your first gig or get to like record your first album? Sometimes getting that grant or that little bit of help along the way can really help people take those first couple of steps.
Yeah, exactly. Especially that's visible with opportunities like the True Music Fund campaign, because we're in a position to be able to prioritize people that we know are typically being discriminated against. So paying closer attention to that group of people is something that is our responsibility.
Definitely. Cool. Well, I wanted to maybe switch gears a little bit and, thinking about some other aspects of what you do and what you work on. And I know that you're no longer doing kind of management duties day to day, but you have in the past. And I was just curious, as somebody who's kind of worked with a lot of artists and, managed people in the past, are there any words of advice that you would give to an artist who's maybe at that stage where they're thinking, do I need a manager? Is it right for me to get a manager? Who would be a good manager for me? Any thoughts or advice or tips?
The management question is really tough because I still believe that being a music manager, is probably the hardest job in the business.
Wow. Wow.
And that's because the role of the manager has also evolved so much over the years. And the role of the manager has changed because the role of the artist has changed as well. So it's this like really intricate ecosystem. If you're an up-and-coming artist and you're at that stage, firstly, you have to identify which stage you're at in your career, because it might be too soon to get a manager. And I think that's even more valid within the electronic music space, for example. I would say if you're an upcoming DJ producer, you probably should get an agent before you get a manager, because the money is not a lot at the beginning, right? So then you have to identify, where does most of my money can come from? If you're a DJ, electronic producer, it will probably more easily come from touring than other things, just playing shows, right? Playing club nights. So when you focus on the live aspect of your career, you need an agent more than you need a manager, because you need that person to like pitch you for all these shows to the promoters and stuff. And it's easier, you could do it alone, but it's easier if somebody who already has those established relationships with the promoters will do it for you. And you probably won't need a manager until things really pick up and there's just so much to do on your plate that you'll need help. And that's where the manager comes in. And then let's say you're at the stage where you realize you do need a manager. What kind of manager do you actually need? Do you need a day-to-day person, or do you need a strategic sort of kind of a person to help you with the big picture? Because those are two very different types of people. Then it depends. Do you go with an independent manager? Do you go with a management company that has all this infrastructure built around you? You know, I think it's very hard to give you a precise answer, because it's a bit like medicine. You know, we've been taught to believe that, oh, if you get a cold, a paracetamol or whatever, an ibuprofen will fix your pain. But if you really are to look at your health from a more holistic perspective, you need to do all the tests, you know, like really figure out where your body is at. Maybe you do need a bit more calcium, but you don't need as much vitamin D. So you shouldn't get a prescription for a pill that just puts calcium and vitamin D together. You should get a prescription that's tailored to your specific levels of supplements and nutrients in your bodies, right? It's the same with an artist, and not just a manager, but a record deal. Or should you be independent? Should you go for a record deal or not? It's the first step would be to really assess where you are, and then to assess the space that you operate in, you know, whether it's the specific music genre or your country, you know. In some cases it's easier to go big with an international audience versus an audience in your own country. Like the rules are just out the door, you know, anything is possible. And I would advise artists to not rush to seek management until they have a very clear understanding of who they are, the space that they operate in, and where they want to be. And once they have those answers, it will be a lot easier to identify the type of manager and where you could potentially find them.
Do you think it's worth also trying to think about somebody who kind of complements your skill set? So I don't know, if you're like super creative, but also super disorganized, somebody, you know, manager's very, very well organized. Or I don't know, if you never think about the visual aspect to, you know, what your artist brand is, somebody who's like more kind of visual and creative, or do you think having some complementary skill sets is helpful?
In theory, yes. That's always good, because we all have skills that we're stronger at than others. Although the assumption with an artist is that they will kind of cover the creative side, right? And the manager will handle the business, logistical. That's the premise from the very beginning, I guess. And again, the assumption is, okay, well, I guess the artist is strong on the creative side, so I need to bring in someone who can help me with logistics or business. In theory, yes, bringing someone who complements your skills or complements an area where you're lacking within your artist brand. And I would focus on the business opportunity there, or the business gap. You know, for example, you've identified that you're an artist whose music, generally speaking, does well in sync. You've heard your type of music a lot in a lot of TV shows or something along those lines. Then it is your responsibility as an artist to be like, okay, I think my biggest chance is to focus on putting my music, or like music supervision, you know, music sync, and just making music for synchronization and licensing opportunities. So then I need to get a manager that's going to help figure out that for me, you know. Or you could go straight to a sync manager, but maybe you don't know that before going through the whole process of trying to find a regular manager in the first place. So
maybe if you have a good mentor, they could help you figure that
there you
out.
go. There you go.
Yeah. I'm curious how you think about record labels then in this day and age. You know, do you have any thoughts on somebody, you know, an artist staying independent? At what point might it make sense for them to sign to a record label? Does it make sense for them to sign to a record label? How do you generally kind of think about that or give advice in that area?
Another big question. What is the role of the record label in 2025 and beyond? I think the answer is the same. You know, it will be a custom answer for you. Even the concept of a record label, like what is a major versus what is an independent label. All the majors started eating up all these smaller imprints. All the majors are eating up all the distribution companies, you know. So even if you are an independent artist who's distributing their music through, let's say, the Orchard is still owned by a major label, you know. So where does that leave you? Are you still independent? Because you're tapping into the network that stakeholder has around them, right? And again, it goes back to this idea of access and relationships. It's a really tough question. I think record labels don't even give deals anymore unless you already have some juice, you know, like this idea of developing talent is so dead right now. It's unfortunate. Yeah. So if you are really at the beginning, indeed, do things on your own, you know, start building your fan base, focus on those 1,000 or your first 100 super fans, then turn them into 1,000. Just like focus on building your own brand and community, whatever that means for you as an artist. And don't worry about a record deal until much later, because one, you may discover you don't need it because you've already done all this work and the machine, you know, you've started like the snowball effect started kind of kicking in for yourself thanks to social media and whatever tools you've used, right, to get to that point. And B, the other option is you learn that there's only so far you can go on your own, which is totally valid, and that you will need an entire infrastructure for your project to really go to the next level. And that's where you start entertaining the idea of getting aiming for a record deal, you know. But having a bad record deal and being shelved as an artist is worse than being on your own. So what that means, you know, it's like, it sounds very bombastic when you say it like that, but what that means is that you should just really be careful. You should pay close attention to the deal and the terms in the deal, because they might still end up being a better option than going on your own, you know, for the remainder of the journey. But it's all in the deal points.
Yeah, I think I've always thought that it's just important to know the trade-off that if you do decide to go down the record label path, knowing the trade-off that you're making with the record label. What is the trade? Because ultimately it's like you're going to trade something in return for something, right? So, you know, whether that's your copyrights or some percentage of revenue or things like that, going into it with your eyes open and being very aware of it. In the same way that, you know, if you get a mortgage on a house, the bank will lend you a ton of money, but they're going to recoup it back and they're going to charge interest. And so just knowing what those numbers are and kind of what the trade you're making, I think is super useful. And this is making me think of, I'm not sure if you've come across, so Grimes' manager is a guy named Dauda, and he built a tool that's name is escaping me right now. It's like Create OS or something like this.
Create Safe.
Create Safe, yes. And it's a really awesome tool where you can go in and you can plug in some of the key kind of record label term or deals and figure out, well, basically this idea, like better understand the trade that you're making and being aware of it going into it, so that there's no nasty surprises or something down the road.
Yeah. And again, it's a lot easier nowadays to be informed, right? Than it used to be. It was a lot easier to lock artists into a really bad deal back in the day, a contract that would keep you stuck for 5 years. Those contracts are like a thing of the past. I think everybody is a lot more educated about their options, and tools like Dauda's deal simulator are perfect, right? To help you make those informed decisions.
Cool. Well, I think we mentioned at the start that you've kind of done some projects with Coachella and AD out of Amsterdam, and obviously that you said that's kind of the boutique side of IAMJT. So I'd love to get into this boutique world and open up the door and just understand a little bit kind of what kind of projects you've been involved in, and hear a little bit more about what you've been working on there.
For sure. The boutique aspect of IAMJT is basically a fancy way for us to capture all the different special projects that we've been working on that don't really fit into a specific category, right? So one of them is indeed the Coachella innovation work, which is something that I've been doing for the past 4 years. It's my 4th year this year. And within that, we focus on emerging technologies like the blockchain, AI, mixed reality, that kind of stuff. I really enjoyed the boutique aspect of my work because it means every day is different. And a lot of those opportunities are actually inbound because of the network that I've created for myself, and people wanting to work with me, and my name being mentioned in rooms or popping up on LinkedIn searches.
I wish you could go back to that room with the suits from BBC and just show them everything you've done. Yeah.
Right. They missed out. They missed out on that one.
I'm curious. So you've kind of done stuff across. You mentioned AI, virtual reality. Web3, obviously a very kind of polarizing topic. I will admit I was quite hopeful, quite excited about it. Maybe a little bit more disillusioned now, seeing things like FTX collapse and things like that. But I'm just curious, kind of how was your experience kind of working in that area, and how do you feel about it today?
When it comes to Web3 in particular, I think we've all experienced high highs at the beginning, and now we're very much in the low lows of that arc, of that narrative. I was always a bit, not skeptical, but I guess this is where my Eastern European roots come in. It's like hope for the best, but plan for the worst kind of thing. I still see the future, of a chain-based internet, basically, where we can track everything more easily. I think it has the potential still to fix a lot of issues in the music industry, especially when it comes to royalty collection, for example. That's all messy, and there's just a ton of money just being lost in thin air. Well, it's not being lost, but whatever, we'll call it that way. Simply because of this incorrect tracking of how music content is being used around the world, physically and digitally. But yeah, there's definitely a lot less excitement in the space when it comes to Web3 nowadays. But we were able to do some really fun things within Coachella, in 2022, if I'm not mistaken. We launched Coachella's first ever NFT collection that unlocked, all sorts of perks, and it enabled us to build a community on Discord that's primarily been centered around our innovation programs, a lot of it with NFTs. But last year, for example, we were able to launch this community initiative called Quest that blended offline and online activities that we asked the community to engage in. And as they were performing those points, they were unlocking what we call XP. This is all tracked on chain, but we just didn't call it that way, right? It was just called Quest. There was no tech lingo language around it. But it was very much all hosted on chain, which is not so different from what the role of the NFT was originally, right? At the height of the hype, which is basically having some sort of digital collectible, and that unlocking all sorts of other things for you. So I think what's changed a lot is the language around it, in addition to not hyping it up anymore, because that scares Gen Pop away. We don't want to get people. I guess actually that's been the biggest issue with Web3 technology, that it's been so difficult to adopt by people who aren't already pretty tech savvy. So it's a space still very much reserved for early adopters. And I think that as the ecosystem continues to develop and lower the barrier to entry from a technology perspective, from an access perspective, so it's not so much about the technology, but it's more about the applications of it. When the ecosystem matures to that point, I think we'll start seeing more hype bubbling up again. But we're still a long way to go until all these different stakeholders start working with each other and building things with each other that are interoperable.
Yeah. Anybody who's had to like recover their seed phrase to their wallet that's integrated to their other browser will know that it's definitely not user friendly yet. So we'll see how it develops. Can you give us any hints of what you're going to be working on this year for Coachella or ADE?
On the Coachella side, this year has actually been more of an R&D year for us, for the innovation team. We were just wrapping up a bunch of older partnerships and working on some new exciting stuff in the background. So yeah, not much I can say about what's happening this year, other than maybe mentioning our partnership with Epic Games. And I guess what that means is that we've recreated what we call a Coachella Island inside of Fortnite. Cool. And so within that, we license music, we develop mini games. It's like another way for people who typically don't attend Coachella or cannot attend Coachella to experience the festival in a different way. And generally, I'm very excited about the convergence of gaming and music as a concept overall. And yeah, it's a space to watch.
Are there going to be any kind of like 300-foot tall artists who come and perform on Coachella Island?
That's a fun idea. I'm gonna pitch it. I'm gonna pitch
wasn't that what, like, was it Travis Scott who did that show in Fortnite, and it was like 300 feet tall, giant?
I think that was the first and like biggest Fortnite / music moment.
Like peak pandemic when everybody was stuck at home, right?
Yeah. But the other thing is that kids spend time with games, right? So it's such an untapped market when it comes to music or music artists, music festivals. We don't really promote to the kids, right? But gaming is a way to really put ourselves in front of what will become your next big fan, and catch them early. So that's an exciting part right there, not to mention everything that you can do with the technology behind it, right? Because the same technology that powers Fortnite, Unreal Engine, is now also being leveraged for large-scale visuals, live visuals on the Coachella Quasar stage, for example, that's powered by Unreal Engine. I think a lot of the main stage at Tomorrowland, and a few other large-scale productions of this kind are really showcasing what's possible when you merge gaming and music software, I guess, because there's multiple involved. And it's only the beginning. It's very exciting what's going to be possible in the space over the next few years.
Yeah. And how about ADE? Can you share any hints of what you're going to be working on there?
We've literally just started working on ADE. I'm at Amsterdam Dance Event. I'm a part of the programming team, so primarily just looking at the conference schedule and some partnerships that we have within the conference. We're going to be talking about emerging markets a lot this year, MENA in particular, Brazil,
Yeah.
Sub-Saharan Africa. Those are some exciting markets we're looking at. We have to talk about AI. We still don't know exactly how we're going to approach it. It's going to be multiple angles, most definitely. But yeah, definitely a good year to give it a big stage. And yeah, there's gonna be some really good music. That's my favorite thing about AD. It's the perfect mix of business and pleasure.
Yeah.
It's
It's pretty unique, I think, in that aspect. I mean, I know Miami Music Week was sort of meant to be that, but I never felt like the conference kind of business side of things was that important, or people really cared about it as much. I think 80 is pretty unique. I mean, I think the closest cousin might be South by Southwest, but obviously that's just kind of so big and so many different things, and not just music even. Well, that's some things to look out for this year, I think. It's definitely an exciting time. I guess one last question I had, and I'd like to ask people before wrapping up, is just, the theme of this podcast is to help give people a bit of the inside track, get a little bit of an understanding of some advice that you've kind of learned and lessons that you've learned along the way over the years. So if you had a time machine and, you could go back and talk to your teenage self, or just younger people in general, really, and talk to them about what you've learned in the music industry, across music culture, like, are there things that come to mind where you would want to sit down with them and say XYZ?
I do get asked this question a lot, and my answer today will actually be quite counter. I think one of my biggest regrets as a teenager was not going for the really tough higher education path. Like straight out of high school, I guess I was what you would call a nerd, and I was on a straight path to study law school in Romania and like do all of that stuff, right? And I had an epiphany moment 2 months before my final exams where I was like, I quit everything. I'm not gonna go this traditional path. I'm just gonna go and study multimedia in London, And for me, just deciding to study in a different country was already such a big life change, and it set me on a completely different course in my life than it would have if I stayed in Romania and went the traditional way. What I wish I did do at the time is aim higher, like go for the better university, because I could have totally gone to a better university or study law, but study it in English. I don't know. Just go for something really tough, because those formative years are so important, and it will really frame how you approach anything in life. So if you have to go through something hard at school, basically, it will prepare you on one hand for all the crazy stuff that's going to happen in your adult life, and all the curveballs that life is going to throw at you, professionally or not. So you'll be better equipped to handle these things and be resilient from the get-go. But secondly, it will also open those doors much more easily for you, because a lot of these people, like we said, they don't come from a working class background. They've probably gone to a really good university. They've probably gone to they've studied a typical kind of profession or like whatever topic at school. In your case, right, you went to Cambridge, you studied maths or something like that, some really insane
engineering, but it's mostly maths.
There you go, right? So you were in those rooms where you met your co-founders and you met other people who probably supported you along your Mixcloud journey. And I was lucky enough to also come in at some point, and come across Mixcloud, and then this whole new path in the music business opened up for me as a result. But it could have easily not happened because I was definitely not in the right rooms at that time. I just got really lucky in my ambition, to forge my own path, but I definitely made it a bit harder for myself by not going to, we're aiming for those kind of spaces. Having said that, you don't have to go to university. You can totally create a path for yourself in life without it. But personally, I would have loved to have made it a bit easier for myself and put myself in those kind of rooms earlier on.
Well, I think you've achieved something big, even if you weren't necessarily aiming big back then when you were a teenager. But I think it's good advice to think big and aim high. I think it's worthwhile hearing. But I wanted to thank you, Andreea, for jumping on today and joining the podcast. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate the time speaking with you. If people want to kind of go deeper and learn a little bit more, shesaid.so, shesaid.so is the website. Where else should people go to kind of get more information, join the community, things like that?
For She Said So, just go to our website. You can subscribe as a free subscriber to our newsletter before you are ready to commit to become a member. And if you want to find me for other non-She Said So related things, you can find me on Instagram, you can find me on LinkedIn. Those are my two preferred channels where I'm a bit more
And active. Is it Andreea Magdalina, all one word, or what's your handle?
On Instagram, it's A Magdalena, but I think if you just start typing in my full name, it will pop up.
Sweet. All right. Well, thank you again for jumping on. And hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Take care.